Welcome, Mark Gable. Thank you for joining me to talk about all things music. So, yes, for people that are watching, Mark is the singer of the fabulous Australian rock band, the Choirboys. So, welcome, Mark.
Welcome. Now, let me see if I get the pronunciation of, Giora.
Joya.
Joya. Like, all right, I blew it. Okay. Joya. But
Close.
what a great name you have,
Oh,
even
thank
though the
you.
spelling doesn't, in English, really signify Joya.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. Much appreciated.
Awesome, awesome. So, Mark, I wanted to ask you. So, one of my first questions is, or I wanted to ask you. I did read that the Choir Boys started in the late 70s, and I think my memory was more early 80s. So, I just wanted to clarify.
Well, yes, because, the band actually started, I think it's on Wikipedia somewhere it says 78, but we really started in fooling around with the idea probably a couple of years before that, me trying to form a rock band
Mhm.
back then. And I think that it's then that I received a phone call, 1978,
Mhm.
and I may have mentioned that in the theatre show on the weekend, that
Mhm.
George Young called up after receiving a demo given to him by Herm Kovac from TMG.
Mhm.
And he rang me up saying, Mark, I like what you're getting together. He assumed that I was a solo artist, right? And then I went in for the meeting. I said, no, it's a band that we're starting. So away we went. We started going in and doing demos around the 78 time. That's when I met Stevie Wright. And of course, he was working in at Albert's, and we're talking about
Wow.
George Young from Easy Beats,
Yeah.
Albert's Productions, AC/DC, Rose Tattoo, Angels, and Stevie Wright, of course. Um, and
What a
and so,
privilege. What a privilege. Wow.
oh yeah, it was great times. And
Mm.
oddly enough, Lindsay Tebbett, who was our original drummer, who passed away a couple of years ago, took some photos. Now I've always been an avid amateur photographer, but during that period, I wasn't taking photos.
Mhm.
Um, and I'd sold my first Nikon that I had. I don't know why,
Oh,
you know.
no.
And so, but there are, and I have been placing them up on Instagram, photos of the recording time around 1983 and the demo time around, the early 80s in at Albert's. So, I mean, the impression you have is the early 80s because we released our first album in 1983.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, that was uh, produced by Jim Manzi,
Yes.
who was, of course, from bass player from Old 55, and engineered by Sam Horsburgh Jr., who is Malcolm Angus's George Young's nephew,
Oh,
and
wow.
so he engineered the album.
Wow.
Um, so it was all very in house, and I used to spend a lot of time in there.
That's
Um,
exciting.
down in Studio 5, where I wrote the beginnings of Run to Paradise,
Yeah.
and up in Studio 1, just watching George,
Oh,
Vander and
wow.
George and Harry
Wow.
working, sometimes. So that was very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, I'm a massive fan of George Young. And actually, Mark, I've sort of been collecting a few old On the Street and Ram magazines and even Rolling Stone. And I'm not sure if you can see, but for example, this one is 1991. And there's a picture that says the Titans clashed backstage. So there you are. Oh, hang on, let me put you in the picture. Can you see that? There,
Vaguely, yes. I
there
see
you are there.
random
So,
notes.
yeah, oh no,
Yeah.
the other one. Hang on. There it is
Oh,
there. So you're sort of
oh right, right.
you're next to Jimmy Barnes. So I just wanted to show you that I've found some really awesome images of various places that you played at. That was at Selena's apparently with Nick Barker and Jimmy Barnes. Then
Yes.
I've got, and then I
That's
found
one of the
this,
better pictures from Selena's.
yeah. Then I've got this 19, oh, what is this? I think it's 83, maybe, Rolling Stone. And I found a picture of you here. It's awesome.
Wow.
I know, it's fantastic. And it just sort of describes that you're the lead singer, and your first single, Never Gonna Die, is popping up all over the airways. And
And
emerging from the illustrious Albert stable, the Choirboys are
yeah,
winning fans during their recent tour, supporting the Angels and Rose Tattoos. So that's in an issue of Rolling Stones. And yeah, and then I just
that's
found some other kind of flyers that show that you were playing, like this
where
one.
did you find this
I
stuff? I mean,
know. I just,
here's a photo that's pre all of that. So look at that.
oh
That's
wow.
probably taken in 1980 at Warringah Mall Shopping Centre in the car park.
That's
Um,
fantastic.
yeah, so isn't that
Wow.
interesting? You know,
That's really, really
so
cool.
and then there's back to me, of course. Oh, by the way, that's going to that guitar. Oops, I got the wrong one. Let's go to this
Yeah.
one. Um, that is my Telecaster,
Mm-hmm.
which I believe is right there.
Oh wow. How amazing. You've still got
Yeah,
it.
I've still got it. It's looking a bit beaten up, but it sounds amazing.
Oh, that's fantastic. Actually,
But it's just,
speaking, I think I heard you say Warringah Mall. Um, I wanted to know, I know a lot of the songs that you've written are kind of stories about your life. So I did want to ask you, I think I read something about Jenny being from Warringah Mall or something, and I want to ask
yes,
you,
indeed.
who's Johnny from Run to Paradise?
Johnny is a reference to Brad Carr, our original guitarist, because
Okay.
um, he and I were fiddling around with the original form of Run to Paradise in, I guess, 1984 or something like that, or even earlier. I'm not too sure. In
Yeah.
Studio 5 at Albert's, and though he didn't contribute anything to the original version, I still gave him a percentage of the songwriting. But it's a reference to Brad in there, but like Bradley, it didn't really work in the song. So, um, and I was disappointed that Brad didn't continue with the band. Because he had lots of issues,
Yeah.
um, and not unusual for rock and rollers. And those issues prohibited him from moving on. He was
Yeah.
just too scared to continue, which was very disappointing. So,
Oh, there
it
you
was like,
go.
Johnny, we were always best of friends, stick together and defend, but you run to paradise.
Yeah.
So there's a big reference to him there. Yes.
And I know that I think hearing some of the way that you reference the Northern Beaches as being an idyllic kind of destination. Personally, I grew up in the western suburbs of Sydney, and I think many times I recall dreaming about moving to the Northern Beaches. It was just such a beautiful, and still is a beautiful part of New South Wales. So yeah, I wanted to ask you in regards to that period when lots and lots of bands were playing around Sydney.
Yeah.
Some of the venues on the Northern Beaches, I have covered some of them in my previous blogs, but for example, the Royal Antler, the Manly Vale, and the DY Hotel. Now, I read somewhere that you mentioned another pub that I hadn't heard of, or I think it was a wine bar in Coleroy. I just wanted to ask you,
Uh,
what was that?
yes, that was called 1066 Wine Bar,
Oh,
which was on 1066 Pittwater Road,
oh,
uh, Coleroy.
Coleroy.
Um, and it was on the beach side. There's a building there now. It looks, pardon me, a bit different. But that's where the reference, once again, of Big Bad Noise.
Okay.
Down at the Big Bad Noise, it talks about the 1066 Wine Bar, you
Wow.
know, and and the funny things I remember seeing happening there. Like we had a drummer or I was in a band called Vela in the 70s.
Yep.
This is when 1066 Wine Bar was around.
Yeah.
And I think even members of Midnight Oil came and saw Vela at that point and what have you. And I remember a girl walking past in the crowd and the drummer that we had tripped her And of course, I laughed because, you know, he tripped her, but she didn't hurt herself. But
Mm.
I laughed at the travesty of it,
Mm.
and she slapped me because she thought that I tripped her. Um, and then there was another occasion where there was this girl laying on the ground,
Mm.
drunk, going, "I just want someone to fuck me," and I
Oh
thought,
dear.
this
Oh
is, and
no.
I was a teetotaler at this point. I hardly drank at all.
Yeah.
And I think even up to that point, I probably drunk 3 times in my life. So
Yeah.
I'm looking at this, I'm going, okay, alcohol's not a great thing.
Yeah.
Even though I did have my spat with it. But you
Yeah.
mentioned the Northern Beaches and that you grew up uh, out in the western suburbs, right? I used to hang mainly at school with the Italians because I
Oh
grew up in
wow.
Brookvale. I loved them, right?
Yeah.
Because they were funny, communicative, loving. Whereas I found um, the Australians okay,
Yeah.
and it must be partly because of my father was Irish, my mother was half German, um, and I grew up in New Guinea, so I had a
Oh
different outlook
wow.
about things. But uh, the Australians are like, yeah, how you going, mate? Yeah, yeah, Sheila's, mate. Yeah, um, bloody wogs.
Yeah, that was
And
brilliant.
I like the bloody wogs. I thought they
Yeah.
were amazing.
And
Um,
it's funny that you're talking about sort of even the people that attended some of these places.
yeah.
An interesting thing that I've sort of discovered was they talk about how some of these suburban beer barns that were around may have promoted the big drinking sort of culture that Australia has. Whereas it's funny when I was I did a vlog on the Grand Hotel, which is a late 79 or something, where a lot of the early punks of Australia kind of used to go and see bands.
Mm.
And I sort of noticed that there weren't that many violent sort of episodes in some of these places because a lot of the people that may have gone to the sort of inner city venues were more interested in the music, whereas some of these suburban places kind of attracted a lot of crowds that wanted to hear the music, but they sort of wanted to kind of get drunk all the time. Do you know what I mean? Like I just kind of noticed maybe some different scenes that existed in Sydney.
Yeah, well, it's hard to track because I had a different experience, because
Yeah,
I came from a place that developed In Excess and Midnight Oil,
yeah,
moving pictures, matte finish, and bands like that.
yeah,
And so, we had the Manly Vale Hotel, we had the Royal Antler Hotel,
yeah,
Avalon Surf Club and Avalon Hotel, and then, you know, um, different joints like that.
yeah,
And there weren't a hell of a lot, but there was enough to keep us all going, right?
yeah,
And uh, you know, DY Hotel, of course, where I first saw Divinals.
yeah.
Saw some amazing acts there. So, but I remember people just going along for the music and
Excellent.
enjoying the music. For
Yeah.
instance, first time I saw Divinals Tuesday night at the DY Hotel,
Oh
they had like
wow.
200 people there,
Wow.
standing ovation at the end, and it was just like, wow, this is Australia. It was a brilliant
Yeah.
time. Um,
Fantastic.
it really was an amazing time
Yeah.
for young people going and listening and viewing
Yeah.
local artists. And this is why Cultures was so good. It's because Don Walker's songs were talking about Australian life,
Yeah.
and things that we were all experiencing. And that's what everybody was talking about was like life, Midnight Oil and all that. It was a great time creatively to
Yeah.
be experiencing Australia.
And I love that people like yourself and, Dave Warner and Mark Seymour, all these songwriters who are kind of including Australian scenes in their songs. I love that. I think that's great.
Mm. Yeah, well, there
Yeah.
was, you look at Paul Kelly and you go,
Yeah.
um, as much as, he he's been incredibly prolific, very much like Steve Kilbey.
Mm.
And both of them were heroin addicts,
Yeah.
yet they were still
Yeah.
producing music all through this.
Yeah.
And I've even said to Steve Kilbey, I go, how did you do it? He goes, I just couldn't stop.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah,
go,
I read his book actually. It was quite an interesting read. But I recently saw the church actually at the Civic Theatre at Newcastle, and I have to say, wow, fabulous. And your show, the Choirboys show at the Laycock at Gosford, oh, it was so good. I enjoyed it so much. And I wanted to ask you, is it still going? And
oh, yeah.
where can people find the information for the tours on your website?
Yes, they can. If they
Okay.
go to choirboys.net,
Okay.
they'll find all the dates there, and also on our Facebook page,
Okay.
which I don't know the address to that.
Well, I'll put a description. I'll write it in my description as well. And I
Yeah.
because I just think I really believe everyone should just anyone who's interested in rock and roll in Australia needs to see this show because I just found it very funny as well. And there are so many stories that you told that people have no idea, even it's funny that speaking of the church, when you said that some people really dislike playing their hit songs, whereas you're quite happy to play Run to Paradise as one of the many songs, but Steve
I must
apparently
be weird.
doesn't like Unguarded Moment. I think,
No, it
yeah,
is.
I find that so bizarre because it's such a great song.
Well, he said it on stage with me once, and he goes, like I said on the show, I said, I fucking hate this song. I love this song. What's the matter with you? And so
uh,
but that's Steve, and that's what I love about
yeah,
him. He's so Steve,
yeah,
and he's so involved with who he is and what he does, and
yeah.
his artwork is amazing as
Oh,
well,
yes,
and
yes.
he's just a creative genius, you
Absolutely.
know,
Absolutely.
and his relationships haven't been very good, and
Yeah.
and I said, what's the problem? So, well, I get in relationships and they just don't work, and I said, wait.
Yeah.
Why don't you want to get counseling or something about it? He go, no. I said, why not? He said, I'm a cunt.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I find him very funny, actually.
Oh, he's hilarious.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
have to catch up with him next time I'm in Sydney, which
yeah.
may be this weekend, but it
Oh,
depends on how
wow.
busy he is.
Yeah.
Yes.
And even I think you mentioned stories about touring with international bands and so I
Yep.
don't think a lot of people even know some of the support like the some of the international bands that have come here and you've supported, or even your overseas jaunts. And I think, Mark, this is one of the reasons that I wanted to continue with these vlogs, is that I wanted to highlight and record and just make people remember that whilst, yeah, we may not be living in that period, so many great artists did come out of those times. And that, and I wanted to just showcase various Australian, entertainers and keep them in the spotlight. I really,
Yeah.
really think it's important to record and document and keep it alive.
Well, this is why I wanted to do this show, and I have done a couple of smaller ones
Yeah,
solo,
yeah.
but now we're taking it all over the country. I think the next one is in Goulburn, and then we're doing Queanbeyan and Wagga, and then we're doing Victoria, and then we're take it up the coast, and it's all
Fantastic.
theatres, of course, because it'll be forgotten,
Mm,
and it's like Todd Hunt, who I mentioned, is the bass player, and the main individual from Dragon at this
yeah,
time.
yeah.
Um, he's told me all these stories, and I've forgotten a lot of them. And I said, Todd, you got to do a book. You got to do a
Yeah.
book. And he goes, too much death, and it's like it's
Oh,
painful for him
yes.
because first of all they lost their original drummer, and then
Mark.
Paul Hewson, and
Yeah.
then Mark. So it's like it's really been you know um, and so all these stories, and even I've got Renee Gayer stories, and
Yeah.
and it's like and it's I don't want it to be forgotten.
Yeah.
It should be shared, because
Yeah,
there's,
absolutely. And in fact, I recently purchased a book, um, and it's not about the 70s or 80s. It's called Sound as Ever, and it's a celebration of the 90s, right? So I wanted
yeah.
to ask you, I reckon there should be another, sort of book similar to that, but celebrating that whole kind of, late 70s, even 80s. Because I do think that whole period was when there were so many bands, and even looking through these Ram and On the Streets and Duke, it's like I think I saw a John English and the Foster Brothers, and he was playing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday every night. He was playing like 7 nights a week.
Well, we used to do two,
Yeah,
sometimes three shows a night,
yeah,
in Sydney. There were 200 and thereabouts,
yeah,
from my memory, 250 venues in Sydney
yeah,
alone.
yeah,
And it was like what everybody did.
yeah,
They didn't do it. They didn't do it Mondays so much, but they
yeah,
did it Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
yeah,
And so, yeah. And, like I say, it was what, now we're all online doing our things, watching movies or whatever. And, like I've got a whole set up here to, for streaming,
yeah.
um, and it's like, for instance, there it is all
Oh,
there. And,
wow.
there's computers and cameras and, what have you, and
Fantastic.
lights set up and all the rest of it,
Oh, how
so,
cool.
and I love it, but it's, and we're going to do in the interim a series of more streaming shows because we did quite a few during COVID,
Yeah,
and that's why I set it up. But we're going to do
yeah.
more, and celebrating. First one's going to be celebrating Easy Beats,
Oh,
um,
perfect.
and and so uh, going through different genres of music that we grew up and loved, um, and who
That's
knows,
amazing. Yeah, that's
so
awesome.
yeah, so hopefully we'll be doing that in the next month or two,
Oh, that's
um,
fantastic. That's so good to
and
hear.
and it will be free on Facebook.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
whereas we did charge with the other ones, but I think that this should be celebrated. And the music that we're doing is a celebration of the
Oh, I love
past.
that. Yeah, I love
Yeah,
that. That's fantastic. And
yeah,
speaking of past and present, the members of your band, the Choirboys, so it has changed a bit over the years. And
yes,
yeah, so
yeah. Well, what you saw was our, um, if except for Paul Watson, who was on
yeah,
drums,
yeah,
um, uh, was the lineup that we had with Lindsay, our
yeah,
original drummer.
yeah,
That was the Run to Paradise
yeah,
uh, lineup.
yeah,
So when we first started, it was myself, Ian Link, on bass,
yeah,
Lindsay on drums, and Brad Carr,
yeah.
the uncooperative, brilliant lead guitarist. Who Richie Blackmore, guitarist from Deep Purple,
Yeah.
said to our manager, "You need to take care of that guy. He's
Oh,
brilliant." Right.
wow.
So we only found that out after the fact. So yeah, there was that lineup, and then progressively, through the '90s, as we went through our wild period, there were several different lineups. So
Yeah.
there have been quite a few people coming and going. Two members from Screaming Jets were in the band at different times.
Brad and Richard,
Sorry,
Brad Heaney and Richard Lara.
that's right. Yes, yes,
Yeah. And Bob
yeah.
Spencer.
And Bob Spencer, who was in the Angels and
Oh,
Skyhooks,
we love Bob Spencer.
was a great player.
Yeah.
Um, and
And
one
a
of the
top
first,
bloke.
one of the first, real players that I met in the '70s when I was working in a music store at Brookvale. Yeah.
Yeah. And Mark, I love the fact that just reading about all this history of Australian music, I learned that I think Bob was only 17 when he joined Finch. Like, that's so
Yes.
young.
Well, yes, and the stories go about, about youth, in that um, Steve Balby, who
Mm.
was,
Noise works.
most Noiseworks, most well
Yeah.
known for has been the bass player for Noiseworks,
Yeah.
is now the singer for My Sex.
Yeah.
He was with the Kevin Borich experience when he
Yep.
was either 16 or 17. And they
Wow.
went over to New Zealand, because Kevin Borich is a New Zealander.
Yep.
And they were doing shows there. And then one day somebody said, let's go and visit Paul Hewson. Now, Paul Hewson, I mentioned before, is
From
a
Dragon.
keyboard player, Dragon, songwriter, main songwriter.
Yeah.
So there they were, shooting up heroin
Oh.
at Paul Hewson's house, And I go, hang on a minute. These guys were all in their 20s, right? And he
Mm.
goes, yes. I said, didn't one of them say, don't do this? He goes, no. Now, Steve had to battle heroin addiction from that point on, because obviously he liked it and got hooked on it, for years, decades.
Wow. Yeah.
And I think now it's like almost 30 years being, clean
That's
and
great.
not, and he's so proud of himself. And
Yeah.
I'm proud of him as well, because I
Yeah.
remember he and I staggering around, me on different things, not heroin. I hated
Yeah.
that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But staggering around the cross together.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and he's been, and as he gets up on stage and he goes, everybody, isn't it great to be alive? And he really
Yeah.
is happy to be alive, because he saved himself,
I love that.
from stupidity,
Yeah. I love that.
but this is what I mean about youth, so many people start when they were young, and I go,
Mm.
oh, I was lucky, because for whatever reason, my parents hardly drank. They smoked,
Mm.
which killed them both. But, for whatever
Yeah.
reason, I just wasn't interested in any of that kind of behavior.
A
But
hundred
there were
percent.
so many other people were, and when they started young.
And in fact, I was even when I was researching for the Bondi Lifesaver at Bondi. Yeah, I was reading. I bought this book that had all these fabulous pictures, and I think there was a photo of John Swan, and some other artists, and yeah, it just sounded like it was just a party place, and it was just part of the whole scene, and I
Mm,
guess yeah, the sad side is that there were some casualties where certain people did kind of suffer, and a lot of people didn't. A lot of people even overcame some of those temptations and went on to bigger and sort of better things with their life. So
yes.
yeah, it's interesting. And speaking of this whole career as a musician, I wanted to ask you, Mark, would you recommend being in a band, not so much even like maybe for your kids, but just someone at school? Like if someone was in high school and they were 17 and they didn't know what to do with their life, would you recommend the music industry as something that they should pursue or try?
It's funny you should mention that, because two reasons.
Yeah.
First one is that we have Melinda Schneider, my wife. We
Yeah.
have her mother up here with us, staying at the moment. We watched the movie Taken last night. Now it stars Liam Neeson, and I've forgotten who the female pop star is that he was protecting at a performance. She's Australian, and I can't remember her name. But anyway, Liam says, he's talking, look, my daughter wants to be a singer. What do you recommend? He said, and the Australian pop star, who's an Australian actress,
Yeah.
says, I'd recommend that she gets another career,
Oh,
chooses another
wow.
career. So funny you
Wow.
should mention that. Now, my son, two of my sons are into
Yeah.
music, and the eldest one, who I was more involved with his music, co-produced an album he recorded in a band called He, She, Wonderland.
Okay.
And let me tell you, he was brilliant.
Oh,
He's a
wow.
brilliant singer. He's a brilliant performer. He's an amazing songwriter. The album is full of amazing songs.
Wow.
But when he went through all that, he didn't want to do it because he didn't want that lifestyle. And he's now a psychologist
Oh
and he's very
wow.
happy doing
Yeah.
that. Yeah. So
It is it's not an easy pathway. Uh,
it's not, but if you're going to do it,
mm,
then if you follow your heart,
yeah,
um, then you have a better chance of having fun with it, And I
yeah,
think people like Ed Sheeran seems to, not that he's in a band, but he's a performing
yeah,
songwriting artist.
yeah,
He seems to really enjoy it.
yeah,
Um, and I think he's like geared for that.
yeah.
So there's people that I admire that are able to do it and
Mm.
are able to do it without any too many negative side effects.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And it's
Mm.
funny because sort of, referencing back to the period of the 80s, it seems that a lot of the bands kind of played more often and used not primitive methods, but they used to travel by bus or van. Whereas these days, it seems like a band can play, just one show during the week, and they'll catch, they'll use airlines and quicker methods to sort of get around. So it's just interesting how it has changed, and
Well,
yeah,
there's I think what's interesting is that the modern bands, like, and everybody goes, I don't like the music and everything, but I listen to stuff and I like it, right?
mm,
And there have been two bands that I'm aware of up here on the Central Coast, and one of
mm.
them is uh, oh um, oh God, I can't
Is
even
it
remember their name.
is it the
Red Hook,
Lazies?
yeah, the
I
Lazies, right?
love
Now,
them.
now they're great, right?
Yeah.
And they're just reforming at this time.
Okay.
There's a newer band called Red Hook, who I
Oh
was
yes.
when I was doing a radio show in it, which is now Triple M
At
Gosford,
2GO, yeah.
2GO. Emmy Mack was working there, and she's the lead singer, and she's amazing. She's a brilliant performer. And then there's a younger band called Little Quirks. Now, the thing that's amazing about these bands is that they are working overseas. They
Wow.
are breaking overseas and doing things overseas, which was very difficult to do the old-fashioned way. So the new way of internet and exposure on internet is making it viable and
Mm-hmm.
plausible for
Yeah.
Australian artists to go overseas. And guys that I met on a plane called Sticky Fingers have
Mm.
been, doing amazing things overseas
Wow.
and locally. And so, once again, an internet version of a band. And so, if a band has itself together,
Yeah.
there's there's greater opportunities
Yeah.
than what there were before. Okay, maybe you won't get an ACDC, maybe you won't get a Midnight
Mm.
Oil,
Yeah.
right? And maybe we won't be all going, singing Sticky Fingers song. They're a
Yeah.
reggae
Yeah.
band, by the
Yeah.
way,
Yeah.
but it's plausible,
Mm.
and there are different opportunities. So I kind of enjoy
Mm.
watching this. I go, Red Hook, wow,
I have
um,
heard their music actually. They're quite good.
yes,
My
they
nephew
are.
got me onto them actually.
Yeah, and I'm pleased that the Lazies are getting themselves back together,
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
really liked that band, and they
Yeah.
went through a lot of upheaval, and
Mm-hmm.
I was very disappointed, and I was kind of encouraging them, um, to keep on doing it. Not that
Yeah.
I had anything to do with
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
but I
Of
just really
course.
liked them and
Yeah.
wanted to see them go on.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
in a sense, it sounds like it might even, for those that are dedicated, it might kind of be a bit easier to sort of maybe branch into
yeah, yeah.
global sort of,
Yes.
domination. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah,
Interesting.
it
Interesting.
can be, and
Yeah.
it's like, they're like everybody's doing the festivals overseas,
Yeah.
and, Lockie Doley band, or Lockie Doley, keyboard player,
Yeah.
is incredible. I love that
I
guy.
think he was
And
at
I love,
Bluesfest.
yes, well, they're
Yeah.
just overseas doing a
Okay.
series of festivals now
Yeah.
with Jackie Barnes, drummer,
Oh,
who's
yeah,
Jimmy
yeah.
Barnes' son,
Yeah.
and who plays with Jimmy. And so there's like all these things that are happening that couldn't happen before. So it really is more of a global market because of the internet. So
And actually, that was
I
another
like that.
question for you. I was going to ask you about, do you think that the Australian music scene is healthy in 2023? Obviously, after COVID and all that, but do you feel that it is still a vibrant and healthy scene? And regardless of what kind of music, whatever genre it might be, whether it's covers, whether it's, you know, new bands, old bands. I personally, as a music fan, I go and see a lot of bands, and I think it is. I think it's still exciting. I'm not, I'm not sort of feeling that it's slipping downhill. I think that it's, you know, doing okay.
Well, it's a carryover from what happened in the 70s and what happened in the 80s and was sort of still going in the 90s. What with Silverchair, Screaming Jets, etc.
Yeah.
And so we'd already established that we were good and enthusiastic about what we were doing.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's a natural course of action to follow through with this.
Yeah.
And it's whereas my generation live in the past, right?
Yeah.
And we can go and do live shows and festivals. We do a lot of festivals, and obviously the theatre shows that we're in the process of doing. But these younger bands, they can do all of that, and now they can do more.
Yeah.
So I think it's very healthy. And the original side of it, like the bands that we mentioned, there's Sticky Fingers.
Yeah.
You mentioned Little Quirks, Red Hook, and the Lazies, and there's more, and it goes on, are original song bands, which I love.
Yes.
They're writing their own songs.
Love it.
About, and there's bands wanting to do that.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's actually probably more opportunity for original songwriting bands than there was before.
Yeah, that's so good to hear, actually. That's so good to hear. And what about yourself, Mark? Do you sometimes go out and catch, support live music in where you live, or is that a bit tricky?
Yeah, it's a bit tricky, because it's like, because we or I might be working so hard, that I go, I just want to be at home, because I do have a 10-year-old and I want to spend time with him and Melinda and all the rest of it, and our 2 cats and 1 dog, 2 cats and 1 dog.
Yeah, my dog's sleeping on the floor here. I don't know if you can see him.
No, I can't see him.
Yeah,
No,
he's a little mini foxy, Spiky. Also, I guess I just wanted to sort of just ask you, out of all those venues in the past, the fact that a lot of them are either closed or they've been transformed into, a trendy pub or whatever, in your opinion, because I'm always interested, and I've read literature and this and that, but why do you think a lot of those venues like the Antler or the Manly Vale in particular, why do you think a lot of these venues close? Do you subscribe to that pokies and, sort of money? Why do you think a lot of those venues aren't around anymore?
Well, I think that they were geared for live performance, and they were geared for an old-fashioned type of existence. And I think that, yes, I do subscribe to the pokey thing, and I actually spoke to Tim Wilson from did I get the name right, Tim?
Tim Friedman.
Tim Friedman, thank you, from the Whitlams, right?
Yeah.
I almost mixed his name up. Tim, and I saw him at the APRA Awards, and I go, Tim, you've inspired me. Choirboys will no longer do pubs, all because of, blow up the pokies, and what it meant and what gambling did to their original bass player, who ended up committing suicide because he gambled all his money away. So I hate the pokies. I'm not a gambling person. And I think that it's personally, I feel it's a horrible existence, going in, pressing buttons, putting your money, hard-earned money in there. And let's face it, poker machines are not designed for the user to win.
Yeah.
If they were, then you'd be the ones with the big buildings, right? Right. They're designed for the whatever the establishment is, whether it is a casino or a pub, to garner money. Now, I don't think that is a great social environment.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I
So,
agree.
yeah,
I agree. And yeah, it's interesting too that I know that in certain pockets of Sydney there was gentrification. For example, when I was researching for the Mansell Room, I used to go there when it was Springfields, and the Cardoma Cafe. I think, in fact, the Cardoma was the first place I saw the Screaming Jets live in 1990 or something. And I'm a
pardon me.
big Jets fan.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just feel as though even that whole sort of people moving in and, kind of complaining to council about the noise and that sort of stuff. So, yeah, it is a different environment. But I'd like to think that I know on the coast, I've been to Drifters Wharf at Gosford, which is a great venue. Um,
Yep.
I try and get up to Newcastle, to Lizottes. And there aren't a lot of other venues. I know the entrance leagues sometimes have, entertainment, but I just still travel to Sydney. I go to the bridge a lot. I love the bridge at Roselle.
Well,
Um,
the bridge is about the only venue
yeah,
in Sydney.
still
I,
standing.
yeah, there are other venues, but people don't really go to them to
Yeah,
see live performances by a pub band or rock and roll band.
yeah,
No,
yeah,
you know.
yeah. It's
So
interesting.
yeah, yeah, it's a different world.
I think there's so much I could talk about. I'm kind of running out of time. I'm just mindful of the clock
No,
here.
that's all right.
But yeah, I think there was another question that I did want to ask you, and I'm not sure how to sort of word it, but there's an author, journalist, writer, Clinton Walker, and he wrote a book about post-punk and punk cultural sort of revolution and in Australia from about 1976 to 1985.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just sort of seem to get this feeling that sometimes there's different tastes in music. And I read somewhere, what was it? He said something about, kind of a bit critical of the rock and roll sort of mindless boogie, he sort of called it in that book. But he kind of mentioned that he sort of liked a few Australian bands like Skyhooks. But yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I feel that there might be this, not competition, but this, oh, I like rock and roll, but no, I like that more sort of alternative
Oh yeah. Yep.
music.
Yep.
You know what I mean? I feel like there's a bit of what's the word? Bias or prejudice or elitism. I don't know. I read some of his stuff and I thought, mate, I kind of like all kinds of music. I don't
Yeah. Well, I'm
criticize,
I'm I'm with you. I'm with you,
Yeah,
Joya, because there there was an individual, and
yeah,
I won't mention who the individual was, but he was very annoyed that I was working with another individual who he was in a band with,
yeah,
and he screamed and yelled at me when I I went to a function once.
yeah,
Um, and so there's an element of coolness which I
yeah,
find annoying with the
yeah,
indie bands, right?
yes,
Because I love the indie music, right? Yet the mainstream rock and roll stuff they hate, right? And
yes,
I go, I just don't get that, right? Because I go, well, you call yourselves indie, but you're not indie because you've all
mm,
been signed to major labels
yeah,
and you make music, you get up on stage and perform,
yeah,
yet you call yourselves indie, right?
yeah.
And I sort of like, I just like, you know, I mean, I even like poopy, 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 bum, bum, right? Um,
And
you
and the
know,
shark song,
Yes, so I'm
Baby
like,
Shark.
I'm not a
Yeah,
snob,
yeah,
and
that's
I'm
what I
not
mean.
interested in snobbery,
Yeah,
and it's like we're all in this together. And
yeah,
there's some bands that I never liked that much, but I
yeah,
like them because it was my taste, but it's not because I was better than them.
yeah.
And
In
that's what I
fact,
find irritating about this one individual, you know, who can basically get stuffed. I love you anyway, Wombat. So you got fired from the band.
There you go.
You
But no, it does. It really kind of annoys me that various, I mean, obviously certain writers have got a job to do when they do their reviews or they sort of write things. But I know, like, yeah, some people can be quite damaging with their comments when they do reviews, and I don't think that's cool. One writer that I love is Stuart Coop. Is that how you say his
Oh
name?
yeah, Stuart Coop. Yeah,
I love reading his stuff.
yeah.
And I've also bought a lot of photography books. Bob King, I adore,
Oh
and
yeah.
Philip Morris. He's got some amazing
Yes,
photos. So yeah,
yes.
I try to support the whole Australian music stuff because I think it's important, and it's obviously a passion of mine. But yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is. And very interested. You mentioned Bob King, and because I'm a photographer and he knew that,
Yeah.
he actually sent me a picture of me in the 70s at
Oh,
a festival at North Sydney holding my camera, looking at people, hippies dancing.
wow.
And Bob took the filter off his camera, off his lens once, and he goes, "Should I clean it, Mark?" And I go, "Are you asking me? You're asking me if you should clean it? Me?"
Oh, that's hilarious. Actually, I think when I went onto your website, I saw some of the photos that you've got, and they're fabulous. A lot of them are from the coast.
Yeah, well, they're just all over. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
just all
that's
over, and
awesome. That's
just
awesome.
different things that I see. And it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
because it's beautiful up here, and I'll give you a little bit of a hint. If you have a look at that,
Oh, is
you
that
know
your view? Oh my
that's
goodness.
yeah. So you know
Wow.
that's from the studio, and I remember
Wow.
Lindsay, our ex drummer, when we were doing one of the live streams, standing here, looking out at the view, and it's like
Oh,
it's
that's gorgeous. Yeah.
it's Australia is a beautiful place. We're very lucky.
Absolutely, absolutely. I've been here since 2009 from Sydney, and yeah, it is. It's quite spectacular. I'm near the sort of entrance region, and the whole
Oh,
coast going up to Newcastle. It's just
and
even on the way to Queensland.
it's great, and we need more Italians.
Yeah,
Really.
definitely, definitely. Well, I'm going to wrap it up, Mark. It's been so lovely, and yeah, I'm going to kind of put all the tour dates and sort of information where people can go
Thank you,
and see
Joy.
that show because I'm really excited that you're doing this show. I think it's fantastic. I loved it. I thought it was so good.
Oh, well, thank you. I really appreciate the
Yeah,
compliment because I feel that it's heartfelt instead of you going,
yeah.
yes, it was really good, Mark, but it wasn't indie.
No, yeah, yeah. And look, you know what? I just even love that whole acoustic sit down intimacy. And
Yep.
I love the choice of songs. All those songs that you chose from various Australian bands. Oh, they were
So,
beautiful.
because it occurred to me, I go, we're not doing April Sun in Cuba. And I go, well, hang on, everybody does that. These are the songs that I remember and loved,
Yeah, yeah.
they were just like, I really liked the weird nutty ones. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think
And
it's just such a fabulous concept. So yeah,
well,
well done.
thank you.
I think it's awesome. So
More of it.
thanks,
Thank you.
Mark. Yeah, thanks for
Okay,
coming
Joya.
on.
And thank you for having me.
Yeah, all righty. Take it easy, eh? All
Okay,
right.
bye now.
See ya. Bye.